So this passage, initially at your one read, you may figure it out that this passage looks like a kind of a business kind of a passage, but later on it actually moves on to the kind of a sociological aspect of the passage. So that is the case. So let's actually have a look at the first paragraph. So it's conventional wisdom in business circles today. That's, so let me just bring the highlighters. Okay, just a second. Okay, so it's conventional wisdom is business circle today that corporate directors should maximize shareholder value. So there's some kind of an existing wisdom in business circles that the corporate directors should maximize shareholders value. Now corporations supposedly exist to serve shareholders interest. So it's a kind of a reiterate the same fact which is mentioned in the first slide. So corporations supposedly exist to serve shareholders' interests and not, or at least not directly, those of executives, employees, customers, or the community. However, this shareholder value dogma backs a fundamental question. What exactly do shareholders value? Okay. So in case if I'm going to talk about the first paragraph, so first paragraph is focusing that the corporate directors should maximize the shareholders value, and then it is kind of a reiterate this fact by saying the same thing, but last line actually ends with the question or the dogma that what is a kind of what exactly do shareholders value. So it is saying that the corporates should maximize shareholder value, and it puts in question to us as a reader to think about that what exactly do shareholders value. So how does the structure of this particular paragraph goes about? So we actually initially started with the popular point of view and the general belief, and then we actually question it. So in case if I have to just summarize it in a few lines, I would say that the corporation supposedly exists to serve shareholders interest, but what is exactly the shareholder value, that is to be discussed maybe in the further passages. So most shareholders value advocates assume that shareholders care only about their own wealth. Okay, so this is saying that the most shareholders value advocates assumes that the shareholders care only about their wealth. But it is increasingly accepted that the Homo economicus model of purely selfish behavior does not always apply. So now here you can see that the author has started gaining the interest, and he's saying that this homo economicus model of purely social selfish behavior does not always apply. Okay, so this possibility provides a challenge to the dominant business paradigm of maximizing shareholder value, the concept of pro-social shareholder. Okay, so this passage is fairly easy to understand, bearing that latent expressions of a homo economicus, but that is also pretty clear, like you'll be able to understand later that what does this particular expression means. So we don't know actually, in case if you're going to go at a first read, so you may be stuck, you don't know what the phrase meant actually, but the sentence give you the clue. Okay, so this model, this homo economicus model probably suggests that people try to maximize their own selfish interest. In other words, people work like in other words, in case if I have to frame, so I would say that the people work only for their own gain. Okay, so that is the case. So that's the case. So let's see how this particular argument is going about. So we started by saying that the purpose of the corporation is to maximize shareholders value, but then we raised the question asking what is the shareholder value. Is it the fact that they just want to maximize their own wealth? Okay, now, the Pareto answers this particular thing by stating that shareholders may not necessarily always want to maximize their own wealth. Okay, so this model of purely selfish behavior does not always apply, because there's something other, some other aspects that the shareholders also definitely look for. Okay, so again, in case if I have to summarize this particular thing, then I would say that the dominant Homo economicus model of purely selfish behavior does not always apply, because the shareholders may not care only about their own wealth. Okay, maybe through the concept of the pro-social shareholder. Okay, so far the things look good. The passage looks easy to understand. So let's move on to the third paragraph. Now, the problem with the Homo economicus theory is that the purely selfish person is a functional psychopath. Okay. Now, the author has come up with the problems with the homo economics theory. So he's saying that the problem with the homo economics theory is that the purely rational, purely selfish person is a functional psychopath. Okay. So he cannot work in a, like, he cannot function properly in a society. So if economic man cares of nothing for ethics or others' welfare, he will lie, cheat, steal, even murder whenever it serves his material interest. Not surprisingly, although Homo economicus is alive and well in many economic departments, many experts today prefer to embrace behavioral economics. Now, the author is changing his position. He's saying that nowadays, what is the many experts are preferring? They are preferring the behavioral economics, okay, which relies on data from experiments to see how real people really behave. Behavioral economics confirms something both important and reassuring. Most of us are not conscienceless psychopaths. Okay, so let's see what this is. So what this particular passage is doing is that the author is saying that it is little weird to assume that human beings function in that way because like human beings are purely selfish or purely rational, because if they did, they would be functional, but they are psychopaths. Okay, they'll be treated as a psychopath. Now, there's a line, no? They say not surprisingly, although Homo economicus is alive and well in many economics departments, that does not mean that it is actually used for a human being. Okay, so that is to convey that this theory is widely accepted in the field of economics. Okay, but people do not always behave with a view to maximize their own wealth. So specifically, Homo economicus theory does not always apply, because if it did, we all will be psychopaths. So that is not a case. Okay, so while the theory is doing well in the field of economics, a lot of experts are now opting for different viewpoint presented by this behavioral economics. Okay. Now, what is this behavioral economics? We can infer, no? So it's something which is opposite to this economicus theory. So the behavioral economics assumes that most of us do not behave selfish all the time. Okay. So that is the case. So let's move on to the next paragraph. So the vast majority of human beings are at least to some degree pro-social. So you can say the concept of a pro-social here. Okay, so what is this theory saying? So it's further elaborating upon it. So the vast majority of human beings are at least to some degree pro-social. In the right circumstance, can be counted to make modest personal sacrifice. So we can make modest personal sacrifice to follow ethical rules and avoid harming others. Of course, it's easy to doubt pervasive pro-sociality when reading the daily news. We should remember, however, that cheating, corruption, and murder make the news because they are relatively rare. No newspaper would run the high headline, "Employees does not steal even when no one is looking." As the phrase common decency suggests, pro-social behavior is so omnipotent, we tend to not to notice it. Okay. So again, a very simple paragraph. Okay, to understand, and maybe this particular lines further is not that important, no, but that is just to author wants to exemplify whatever he wants to convey to us. Okay, so he has mentioned, see here I could see that the pro-social is mentioned in a quote. Okay, so it is going to explain now further that what does it mean, and the author is further in this particular paragraph is explaining us that what does this pro-social mean. So that in the right circumstances we can be counted to make modest personal sacrifices to fit as if we are pro-social to the society. Okay, so that is the case. Rest of the paragraph is really not that important. Main purpose is to introduce, let's say, maybe a kind of a humor here. Okay, so to take away the seriousness of the passage as a whole. Now, contrary to the homo economics model, which believes that the human beings are purely rational, purely selfish, okay, most of are not really that. Okay, so the majority of the human beings are a pro-social, maybe at least to some where is the cursor, maybe at least to some degree. Okay, so that is the case. So kind of a contradiction to the previous paragraph. Okay, now pro-sociality is endemic. Okay, now in case if you don't know the meaning of the endemic also, but then again I think so that you could have figured it out from reading the passage, but for those who don't know, so pro-sociality. So now that we are there in the pandemic area, so arena. So you should all know, no, what is endemic, what is epidemic, and what is pandemic. So pro-sociality is endemic. So endemic is something which is native to us, something that is inherent in us, or maybe you can say something which is intrinsic in us, which is already there in us. Okay. So in a common experiment called the social dilemma, anonymous subjects choose between a defection strategy that maximizes their own personal payoffs and a cooperation strategy that gains them slightly less but give other members of the group substantially more. Now, up to 97% of the subjects choose cooperation in some social dilemmas. Not surprisingly, researchers have found that the incidence of such pro-social behaviors declines as the personal cost of acting pro-socially rises. Now, we are more likely to be nice when it only takes a little, not a lot, of skin of our noses. But the scientific evidence demonstrates the vast majority of people will make at least small sacrifices to follow their conscience and help others. Okay. So again, an easy passage. So they say that they conducted some kind of an experiment out here, and they say that you join uh, people generally prefer cooperation strategy, which is like person gain little bit less but the members of the group gain substantially more. So up to 97% of the people actually opted for the cooperation strategy rather than the defection strategy, in which you gain more but the other people do not gain as much. Okay. So from that, the researchers have concluded that the vast majority of the people, they make at least small sacrifices, okay, to follow their conscience and with a notion to help others. Okay. So maybe in other words, you can say that some people have the tendency of giving up a little bit in order to benefit the larger. Okay. So this is being proved by the common experiment that the people generally follow their conscience. Okay. So all in all, an easy passage. Okay, so this kind of the passage you should not miss in your actual cats. Okay, so they are easy to read, easy to interpret, not very complicated words. Okay, so that's the case. So overall, in case if we just summarize what the how the mode of the passage is going. So initially, the author is saying that the most of this common thing is that the corporate should serve the shareholders' interest, but then what is the shareholders' value? Then there was one theory, that is homo economicus theory, that says that uh, shareholders carry only about their own wealth, but the author negates that by saying that they generally are not selfish. Okay, they he take up the side of a behavioral economics, and they say that the majority of the human beings are pro-social to the some degree. So that's the case, and then it's been proven by a kind of an experiment. So the pro-sociality. So on the whole, it is fairly easy passage, not much which has given you a botheration. So let's actually move on to the question types. Okay. So according to the passage, the shareholder value dogma includes all of the following except. So the shareholder value. Oh, let me just change the color. Okay. So, according to the passage, the shareholder value dogma includes all of the following except, okay, so the shareholders value dogma is somewhere stated here, okay, and since it's an except question, so something that is not being highlighted. So, the belief that corporations exist um, to serve shareholders' interests. So that is a part of a shareholders' value dogma. It's clearly stated. So they are saying no, corporations supposedly exist to serve shareholders' interests. So it is a conventional wisdom. Okay. So we can say that the belief that the corporations exist to serve shareholders' interest. Okay. So this cannot be the answer because it is an except question. Okay. So that's okay. So assumption that shareholders care only about their own wealth. Okay, so there's also mentioned here. So most shareholder value advocates assume that shareholders carry only about their own wealth. So there is an assumption by this most shareholder value advocates. So they advocate or assume. Okay. So the assumption that shareholders carry only about their own wealth. So again, related to a part of a shareholder value dogma. The principle that company directors must maximize shareholders' wealth. Okay. So again, it's written that the corporation supposedly exists to serve shareholders. This it is conventional wisdom. Okay, let's say in business that corporate directors should maximize shareholder value. So the principle that company directors must maximize shareholders' wealth. Okay. Now in this case, wealth would have given you a little trouble. because wealth, you may think that the wealth makes it incorrect because they're talking about the value. Okay, so for a time being we're going to keep this option on hold. Okay, so let's see in case if the fourth option is directly mentioned, or in case if you have to figure out between the two. Now the argument that companies should not follow the homo economicus model. Now in fact, this is the idea which has been contradicted by the author. Okay, so it's not a kind of a the shareholder value dogma that includes. So the shareholder value was mentioned till here. So that was a kind of a dogma. Okay. Now the argument that companies should not follow the homo economicus model, it is believed that generally it is believed or the assume that since shareholders carry only about their own wealth, okay, so one should apply this homo economicus model of purely selfish behavior. Okay, but what this or option is saying that the argument that companies should not follow home economicus model, again, it is not kind of a thing which is like argumented. Okay, nowhere it is say that they should not follow the homo economicus model. Rather they say that what applies more is a many experts today prefer to embrace behavioral economics. Okay, so the author has nowhere stated that they should not follow the homo economicus model. Okay, so they're saying that it's so endemic. Okay, this pro sociality is so endemic that automatically, okay, that again they feel that this maybe, but it is increasingly accepted that homo economicus model of purely social behavior does not always apply. So it is already increasingly accepted. So it is nowhere said that by the author that it should follow, it should not follow the homo economicus model. Okay, so that is the case. Now again the shareholder value dogma, again this purely selfish behavior and all that may does not apply, but nowhere advocated strongly. Okay, so that is the case that the fourth is actually the correct answer. Now the wealth, we will here assume that the wealth maybe to certain extent means the value. Okay, so in that case we have to say that the three is not the option because the fourth is rather more incorrect. So out of the three and a four, in case if I have to go, I'll definitely go for the fourth option. So because again something which is not given directly. Okay, so that's the case. Okay, now, I hope you'll be able to get the answer to this question. So let's move on to the second question. Which of the following can be deduced from the third paragraph? So this is a very specific question. So we have to infer or deduce something on the basis of the third paragraph. So let's see. The economic man is the figurative human being. So this is to be deduced. Okay. So now the economic man is a figurative human being. Okay, so now what is the economic man? So in case if you have read this passage carefully, okay, there were the two kind of the people that were mentioned here. So the problem with the homo economicus theory is that the purely rational, purely selfish person is a functional psychopath if economic man cares nothing for ethics or otherwise others welfare. He will lie, cheat, steal, even murder whenever it serves his material interest. Not surprisingly, although Homo economicus is alive and well in many economic departments, many experts today prefer to embrace behavioral economics, which relies on data from experiment to see how real people really behave. Okay, so now, from this line, it can be inferred that the Homo economicus theory does not deal with the real people. Okay, so we can say, no, many experts today prefer to embrace behavioral economics, which relies on data from experiments to see how real people really behave. Okay, so from this line, we can deduce that the economic man is a figurative human being. Okay, so he's not a real man. Okay, because the real man really they cannot be purely rational, they cannot be purely selfish, because in case if they are purely rational and purely selfish or an economic man, they would be functional psychopath. They would care nothing for ethics or the welfare of the other. They will lie, cheat, steal, even murder. Okay, so that is not the case. Okay, so many experts today prefer to embrace behavior which relies on data from experiment to see how real people really behave. Okay, so that means that the homo economicus theory does not deal with the real people. Okay, so that is a kind of a figurative human being. Okay, something that is there only like you can say there in the books or there in the theory. Okay, so who does not exist in reality. Okay, so it means that we are not talking of a real people. Homo economicus is just a notion, it's just a theory or an idea So it is not really a prediction of what real people behave. So which particular branch of the theories will going to give us the idea? That is actually the behavioral economics. Okay. So from this we can deduce that the economic man is a figurative human being. Okay. So who does not deal with the real people, but a figurative human being who does not actually exist. Okay. So by this we can say that the first is the correct answer, and the correct answer to the question number second is of course the first. But let's see the rest of the options. Okay. Now, behavioral economics is based on the concept of economic man. Again, this is kind of contradicting, no? So, economic man is a kind of, you can say, a postulate of Homo economicus. So, let me just clear it for one by one options. Okay. So this is the answer. So this is saying that the behavioral economics is based on the concept of economic man. Now you can see that the problem with the Homo economicus theory is that it is purely rational. If economic man, so economic man is a kind of a postulate of Homo economics theory, and it is not of a behavioral economics. Now the behavioral economics are concerned about the real people. Okay, so it's a postulate of this concept of economic man is a postulate of, you can say, Homo economics theory. Okay. Now, the postulate of human beings means that it is assumed in existence. Okay. As far as the discussion for this particular theory is concerned. Okay. So that is incorrect. We cannot deduce this. Now, Homo economics theory deals with functional psychopathy. Okay. Now, functional psychopathy, you can say, it's a kind of a thing. Okay. It's a kind of a trap option. Now, what is a kind of a trap option? It actually, let's say, words might be there in the exact passage. So the exact words are there. There's in Homo economics theory, there's a functional psychopath. Okay. But the interpretation is very different. Okay. So the other words, functional psychopathy, is similarly used in the passage as it is used in the passage, as it is used in the options. So that's not a case. Okay. So my advice here is don't look at the words. Okay. I hope you're able to make that distinction, but let's understand it. Okay. So what this says that the problem with the Homo economicus theory is that the purely rational, purely selfish person is a functional psychopath. Okay. So they are saying that it is a functional psychopath. So this is actually the problem with a Homo economicus theory. It's nowhere states that Homo economics theories deals with functional psychopathy. Okay. So it's a kind of, you can say, it's a problem. Okay. So the problem does not mean that the functional psychopathy is the focus of the Homo economicus. Okay. So it is said to indicate what is wrong with the Homo economicus theory. Okay. So advice, don't look at the words. Okay. Just because the same words are present does not make this or does not qualify this particular option as a correct answer. Okay. You have to go deeper to understand, like, is the interpretation similar to what is said in the passage? Okay. So that's the case. So that cannot be deduced. Now, Homo economicus theory is a dead theory in economics. This was pretty easy to rule out. Okay. The passage says that, no, not surprisingly, although Homo economicus is alive and well in many economics department. Okay, so alive and well is again here used figuratively. Okay, so it states the contrary, that a Homo economicus theory is widespread. Okay, or it's well known in economics department. So we cannot say that the Homo economicus theory is a dead theory in economics. So henceforth, uh, the first is my correct answer. Okay, so I hope you are able to figure it out. So according to the passage, behavioral economics holds the view that, okay, so now we have to focus upon the behavioral economics. So behavioral economics comes somewhere here, okay. So let's see. Now, people are fully rational while pursuing their material interests. Now, I hope you'll be easily able to eliminate this option, okay, because we know that purely rational or fully rational, okay, or they care for purely selfish behavior, okay, they care for their own wealth. So this is all the things which was being given by the Homo economicus theory. So this view is supported by the Homo economics theory. Okay, this is mentioned, but not with the reference to the behavioral economics, but with the reference to the Homo economicus theory. But the question concerned is behavioral economics holds the view. Now, people generally tend to help others and seek social acceptance. Now, this is the correct answer. In case if you have read this passage, I don't think so that you have to time and again you have to go to the passage to answer to this question. So, not surprisingly, although Homo economicus, many experts today prefer to be prefer the behavioral economics, okay, which relies on data from experiments to see how real people behave. Okay, most of us, another vast majority of human beings are at least to some degree pro-social. In the right circumstances, we can be counted on to make modest personal sacrifices to follow ethical rules and avoid helping others. Of course, it's easy to doubt blah, 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 blah. Okay. So we can say this thing, okay, that people generally tend to help others and seek social acceptance. Okay. So that is the reason, no, that he will lie and whenever it serves. Okay. So that is the case. So we can say that the people generally tend to um, help others and seek social acceptance. This the pro-social, that in the right circumstances we tend to give up certain things in order to avoid harming others, and you can say, no, being socially accepted for that matter. Okay. So let's see the third and the fourth this thing. So maybe one thing that I think so that would have given you a little trouble is a social acceptance. That nowhere you could say that it is directly mentioned that they are socially accepted. Okay, this is by the behavioral economics. Okay, so but it's not explicitly mentioned. I do agree, but when we try to follow, let's say, we can assume, no, this thing we can actually kind of deduce also that when we try to follow ethical rules, okay, or when we try to help others or not avoid harming others, okay, so it might be that we are trying to be socially accepted, no, so we can say that the social acceptance can be a part of it, no, kind in that manner. Okay, so in fact from here it says, no, steal, even murder when it's there. Okay, so how real people real behave, so that's the case. So we can say, okay, that socially they seek the social acceptance. Okay, but let's see the rest of the options, but it can be deduced, no, social acceptance can be deduced, and you're following all these things. So why you're doing it? Because you're pro-social. Okay, you are there something which is wants to be the part of the society. Okay, or wants to live in a society. For that matter, you can say here. Okay. Okay. Now, people are more interested in stories of cheating, corruption, and murder. Now, this is totally irrelevant. Now, this is a part of the author's explanation of society behavior. The passage suggests that these kinds of story make news, even if it is true, it is irrelevant to the question concerned. So, the passage question is asking you, according to the passage, behavioral economics holds the view. Now, this is not the behavioral economics view. Okay, so they are saying that, of course, it's easy to doubt pervasive pro-sociality when reading the daily news. Now, this is something which is advocated by the author, and which the author has given us the example that the pro-sociality is so endemic, okay, that it is so omnipresent that we tend not to notice it. So, to present this particular opinion, he has given us this particular example of the newspaper stories, okay, but very irrelevant to the question concerned, so cannot be the answer. Now, real people make personal sacrifices to maximize their self interest. Okay, now a real people, you may find it very tempting. Okay, yeah, behavioral economics, and they were concerned about the real people. Okay, so but it's a distraction. Okay, so this particular paragraph actually suggests the contrary. Okay, it is clearly stated that most people prefer, see here, no, it's written, okay, that yeah, not surprisingly, researchers have found that the incidence of such pro-social behavior declines as the personal cost of acting pro-sociality rises. Okay, so we are more likely to be nice when it only takes a little, not a lot of skin off our noses. Okay, so it is clearly settled as said that most people prefer, let's say, the cooperation strategy in case if they tend to lose out little bit. Okay, yet they prefer it because it helps other people gain more. Okay, now real people make personal sacrifices to maximize their self-interest is not a case. Okay, so they maybe in order to it's no, again, let's get back to this particular thing, that we tend to make modest personal sacrifices. Okay, and we prefer a cooperation strategy, okay, which says that gains them slightly less but give others of the group substantially more. Okay, so this is kind of contradicting. This personal sacrifices to maximize their self-interest is not a case. Okay, so maximization of this self-interest is kind of caring about their own wealth and a kind of thing which is related to the homo economicus theory. Okay, so when they are making a little bit of the personal sacrifices, so they are not fulfilling their self interest. That is the kind of maximizing their personal payoffs is a part of a defection strategy which is not being followed by them. Okay, so kind of a contrast things which are being presented here. So may is not the answer, and the second is your correct answer. I hope you're able to figure it out. Now, the last question for this particular passage, the social dilemma experiment does not show that. So, the social dilemma experiment was kind of, let's say, you can say the experiment was mentioned mentioned here. So, let's see it. Okay, so very specific question. Okay, now pro-social behavior is not now the social dilemma experiment does not show that. So, it's the opposite. Okay, so the pro-social behavior is natural to people in economic behavior. Okay, so this is clearly given. So pro-sociality is endemic. And in case if you have gone through the summary, I've explained you the meaning of the word. Endemic is something that is inheritant, or is something that comes naturally to people when they are behaving in an economic situation. Okay, so there is a line. So social dilemma experiment shows that pro-social behavior is natural to people in economic behavior. Now, individuals normally avoid defection strategy in economic decisions. So that's pretty clear from this particular experiment. They say that up to 97% of the suggest choose cooperation in some social dilemma. So individuals normally avoid defection strategy in the economic decisions. Okay, so the behavior of the 97% supports the inference that they normally behave this way. Okay, now you can say that in some social dilemma, so economic decision could be a part of one of the social dilemmas. So we can take it up. Okay, unless and until there's no other option, and then we have to come back. Okay, now, pro-social and economic behavior are mutually exclusive. Now, this is actually the correct answer because the question is related to does not. Okay, so the data does not support this. Okay, that whether cooperative behavior, sorry, whether this cooperation behavior or this pro-social behavior, they are kind of a mutually exclusive. Okay, so now, in case what you can say is that mutually exclusive. Okay, generally it means that when you perform one kind of a behavior, you cannot perform the second kind of a behavior for that matter. Okay, so that is the case. So it is something that experiment clearly proves. Okay, so we can say that the pro-social and the economic behavior are mutually exclusive. That is not a case. Okay, but let's see the fourth operation. So cooperation strategy depends on the cost of pro-social behavior. Now, this is clearly given. Okay, so it's mentioned. No, not surprisingly, researchers have found that the incidence of such pro-social behaviors declines as the personal cost of acting pro-socially rises. Okay, so cooperation strategy depends on the cost of pro-social behavior. So again, directly given. So something which is not directly given is that uh, this pro-social and economic behavior are mutually exclusive. So that is not a case. Okay, the higher the cost, okay, the higher the cost, the lower is the chances of the pro-social choices. Okay, so we cannot say that the economic behavior and the uh, pro-social are mutually exclusive. Okay, so that's okay. Okay, so I hope an easy passage, not a very difficult passage. So I hope you'll be able to understand it. Okay, so let's move on to the